Yeah, boy, it's July 16th, and it's episode 81, and this is a Fantasy Football Auctioneer. I'm your host, Uncle Buckets. The Fantasy Football Auctioneer is the official podcast of thefantasyfootballauction.com, the internet's only website dedicated to fantasy football auctions. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/fantasy football auctioneer, or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. We are at Fantasy Auction. We've got a great show for you tonight. Tonight we're going to take a look at some early auction draft trends that we've been noticing out there, and then we're going to take a look at those running backs and break down what we saw last year and what we see coming into this year. But of course, our experts, they're always here. He's fresh off the softball infield. Slim, how's the old batting average?
Solid. Bat was working.
Yeah,
the pitching arm was a little loose, but the bat was working.
Well, I wasn't sure if you were on the mound or not, so that's why I just put a little infield. That's why we're potting on a Wednesday night, because Slim had a mean game of softball to attend to.
It was very heated.
When I say softball, I mean slow pitch, by the way. It's just so that our American listeners are like, wicked, he's a fastball pitcher?
Yeah. No, I just lob them in there. A lot
of popcorn. Got to get them in place so your team can get them out. I know how it goes.
That's right.
All right. Moving on. He's putting the finishing touches on our big annual golf trip. Blister, how's the short game today?
Today was terrible, Bex, because it was hard to play through the cobwebs in the bush.
Oh.
It was rough. Yesterday, much better. But today was bad.
Well, I'll get out for my second round tomorrow before we rattle off 4 next week. So good times are ahead of us.
You won't have any bad habits yet. You'll be ready to go.
Bad habits yet? That's all I am is bad habits. I got my 9 good holes out of the way.
We've developed you into a respectable golfer. Got you a decent set of set of clubs there now, so that's half the battle right there.
That's right. The bag's still ugly, and I got to pick up a putter, but we'll see how that all works out. I might get one this weekend in Minneapolis.
So do I.
Shout out to the Twin Cities, by the way. I was doing some Google Analytics. It turns out there's a lot of fans of the auctioneer from the city. So shout out to the Twin Cities. All right. Where are we now? Okay. Enough of that. That's good. So hey, like I said. Yeah, we're going to look at running backs. All right, that's what we're going to do. So if you guys are ready, then I'm ready. Let's cock the hammer. It's time for action. All right, so like I said before, we've got a great show for you tonight. Early auction trends, and of course, we're going to break down the running back position. But first, we've been getting, even though it's dead zone for fantasy, we're getting email and Twitter questions. So guys, why don't we rattle some of those off first? So the first one came to us via email. You can always email us. We are at footballauctioneer@gmail.com. So the question goes, Sup Canucks. Need some help choosing some keepers in a deep league. 12 teams, 20 roster spots, standard, looks like standard lineup. A little bit different scoring though, guys. Wide receivers are the only position there are PPR. And tight ends get 1 point for every 5 yards receiving. So he has some keeper questions here. He's going to keep Stafford, Foster, and Bo, but he needs to keep 3 more. So this is his list. Lamar Miller, David Wilson, Josh Gordon. He puts in brackets, why are you such a talented dumbass? Jermichael Finley, Tyler Eifert, or Ladarius Green. So you have to pick 3 from there. Miller, Wilson, Gordon, Finley, Eifert, or Green. Slim, you first.
Okay, well, I'm ruling out Finley and Wilson because of their neck injuries right there. So now it leaves Miller, Gordon, Eifert, and Ladarius Green. I'm really not that high on Lamar Miller, so I think I'm keeping Gordon just based on his upside. We all know how talented he is, and yeah, he's probably going to miss the majority of this year, maybe all of it, but hopefully he will be back at some point and producing again at elite wide receiver 1 levels. And then I'm going to keep Eifert and Green, just because I think they have more upside than somebody like Lamar Miller. both of those guys could very well end up being top 10 tight ends, maybe not this year, but hopefully as soon as next year, or maybe even by the end of the season they're producing at that level. They both definitely have the potential to do that. So, yeah, those are the three guys I would pick.
So, Blister, anything different? Miller, Wilson, Gordon, Finley, Eifert, or Green? Pick three.
I think I would go with the first three, Miller, Wilson, and Gordon for now. I just think if I switched anybody out, I'd probably switch Miller out for Ladarius Green. Now, you mentioned here that the tight ends get 1 point per every 5 yards, so there is some merit to looking at these tight ends, but I really think that if you cut these tight ends, I mean, Jeremichael Finley, who knows where he's going to land. If he does come back, first of all, from a neck injury, where is he going to play? Obviously, hopefully it's in Green Bay, but not necessarily, so I'd steer clear of him. But I just think if you cut them free, there's pretty good chance that you can still pick them up in your draft, one or two of these guys. They're not going to be guys that Ladarius is the only guy that might, there's going to be a little bit more hype with him, but Antonio Gates is still there, and he's got good rapport with Rivers. So, Ladarius Green is kind of a fancy name this year, a name that people are kind of coveting a bit, but he hasn't done it yet. So I'd be a little nervous. Lamar Miller is not too exciting, obviously. David Wilson with a neck injury, I just think that if he does come back and he's young and he's able to play, he's got the most potential out of those guys, aside from Josh Gordon. I would still keep Josh Gordon. Even if he comes back, and like I kept him, I drafted him recently in a draft, and I'm thinking that if he gets the whole year, well, in a redraft you can just cut him and go to the waiver wire, because it was in the 18th round when I drafted him, and I figure that the guys that are out there in the 18th round, really there's not much difference between them and the guys I drafted in the 20th round or the 22nd round. So if I take Gordon there and he ends up playing some games this year, it's going to be those games come, maybe a couple before the fantasy playoffs and then in your fantasy playoffs. So why wouldn't you want a guy like Josh Gordon in your lineup for the fantasy playoffs versus, somebody out there that is a six-string receiver on some team? So I would keep Wilson and Gordon, and then I'd flip a coin between Miller and Ladarius Green. You could probably get either of those guys in the draft. Take a look at where you draft, who's drafting ahead of you, what their needs are. If it's tight end or running back, that might help you make a decision. But I really think that the tight ends especially, they're going to be guys out there of equal or better value that you could probably grab from the waiver wire or during your draft. Sorry.
All right, there you go. And if I had to, I'd probably go Wilson, Gordon, and Green would be the three I'd probably keep. Anyways, thanks for the question, Falcon. We've seen him some Twitter questions as well. So he emailed us at footballauctioneer@gmail.com. You can send us your questions that way. If the 140 characters on Twitter aren't enough for you. They were enough for our Twitter question, though, this week, guys. At Garcha Med asks, very simply, he's looking for buy quarterback cheap candidates. Slim, give us a couple.
Well, this is an interesting question because it's so draft specific, and I think in a lot of the drafts that we're in together, we see quarterbacks are so devalued. Somebody like I'm thinking even Andrew Luck or Nick Foles goes for close to single digits. There's a typical candidates though. Kaepernick, Russell Wilson, Matt Ryan. I like all three of those. I think if I had to pick one out of there this year, I kind of like Matt Ryan a little bit more, just because I think now with these healthy receiving options this year, hopefully we should see a little bit of a fantasy scoring rebound for Matt Ryan. So I like him a little bit more than those guys. Somebody like Jay Cutler, he's a popular choice. He can usually be had for under $5 in a draft. If you want to go a little bit deeper, then you start looking at somebody maybe like Andy Dalton. To me, he's the ultimate streamer because he plays like a QB1 against garbage defenses, but he has tougher times against good defenses. So he's not maybe a guy you want to rely on to start week in, week out. Same with Big Ben. I think they're going to be a little more up-tempo this year, so extra snaps could be a good thing for Roethlisberger. You could air it out a little bit more. Again, good streaming option. And then, if you want to go really, really deep, as a streamer, somebody like Geno Smith. to me is a good streaming option. He's going to have some rough games probably, but he also has some decent scoring games and QB1 scoring games actually, where he's a top 12 quarterback, and he can do some things with his feet, which is good. They've brought some pieces in to hopefully help him a little bit. They've addressed the run game. Hopefully that'll be a little bit more stable this year. So I think that there'll be a little bit less pressure on his shoulders, and he'll be able to actually have some decent games for you as a streaming option. And you can get him probably for $1.
Awesome. Blister, any guys to
Okay,
add
well,
there?
I'll throw some numbers at from our most recent. We had an auction Monday night, an online auction, and these are some cheap dollar value quarterbacks, but guys that can definitely produce. And at this price, you can have no problem picking them up. And this is in no particular order, but Tom Brady went for 7, and I've got him in a couple auctions now for about that price. And I probably would have got him cheaper if guys didn't think I liked him, because I like the Patriots. So I probably could have got him for 4 or 5. Dalton for 4, Flacco for $1, Alex Smith for $1, Nick Foles went for 10, which is cheaper than some of them. He's been going a little bit higher. Eli for 2, Russell for 5. I know Slim was uber excited to get Cap for $4. Philip Rivers for 3, Cutler for 5. Cam Newton was down. He went down for $9, which is probably cheaper than he's went in the last 2-3 years. Big Ben for $1, and then Uncle Buckets grabbed Matt Ryan for 4 and Tony Romo for 5. So I mean, when you're talking streaming quarterbacks, and I remember last year in the big auction, I got I could be off $1 or $2, but I got Stafford for about 6 or 7, and then I ended up bidding on Russell Wilson. I can't remember which order it was, for about the same price, and at that time I was only trying to bid the one guy up, because you can't get him for $4 or $5. I just got Stafford for so cheap. You got to have to pay more for this guy, but then bam, I got stuck with him, which was not a bad option. But one thing I found in that particular one, if you have a bench of only 7 or 8 guys, and you have a backup quarterback like you got Matt Stafford, for example, starting, you have a hard time putting in that other quarterback. But you never want to get rid of him either. So you're not going to, like, Bex will never put Matt Ryan or Tony Romo on the waivers unless they have a season-ending injury. So it's kind of tough, because if you got a small bench, it chews up a spot. You can't you can't stockpile running backs. It kind of bugged me last year that I had him. I couldn't let him go to somebody and watch him potentially beat me 1 week, but at the same point I couldn't put a guy there that maybe during the draft a guy that could potentially break out. And so that's one thing you got to consider. You're better off grabbing say you get Brady for 7 and then picking up Flacco for $1 or something, and then you don't have a big deal. Yeah. You won't have a hard time dropping him, or just don't draft a backup quarterback. Wait till your bye week, depending on how deep it is in your league. So that's another option.
Well, I had some money kicking around, obviously, because the draft wasn't going the way that I had planned, and well, that's just how I draft. And I usually am looking for cheap quarterbacks. I was pumped to get Matt Ryan at $4. I thought that was one of the steals of the draft, really, to be honest with you. But there's still something in the back of my mind about Matt Ryan where I don't know how much I trust him. And so that's where I just thought, if I had some money and I could spend it, then I know Tony Romo is going to be QB1 most weeks, right? So if it doesn't go well, then I burned $4 on that quarterback, but at least I know I'm going to have one good guy.
Well, I wouldn't. I would do what you did. I'd do it over again too. I ended up with Brady and Andy Dalton. I didn't really want Dalton, but I ended up getting him for $4. But and then this bench we have 10 guys too, so that 2-3 extra spots compared to some leagues, it's not so bad. I don't think it'll bother you at all, because if you can't find 9 out of your other 9 bench spots, that 10th one isn't going to be the difference maker. But at least you have a solid quarterback there, and he's not playing against you ever either.
To just make sure that you do know your rules for how many bench spots you have. And I was otherwise occupied, and I looked and I went, oh man, I only have 2 bench spots left, and I didn't realize I could scroll down because I was rattled as it was. And I'm like, oh, I got lots of bench spots left. So luckily I didn't go blow a bunch of cash on some loser. So anyways, just keep that in mind as a rookie thing. On ESPN, you can scroll down there and you can see where your bench is. Anyways, continue, Slim. Sorry.
No, I was just going to kind of say, on the other side of the coin, I'll say I learned my lesson a little bit last year. I had Kaepernick in our big auction that we did. He was under $10, but I didn't take another quarterback. And when Kaepernick was struggling, I was in tough shape. It was tough to scab together a decent streaming option. So, I mean, you kind of got to gauge who you have. Obviously, if you got Aaron Rodgers or Breeze, where this is
Right.
this topic, this is not even a discussion we're having. But when you've got somebody like Russell Wilson or Cap, I'm trying to think of somebody else. Ryan, to me, is more stable than those two guys even. You might want to look at getting a backup. Like I went and at the very end of the draft, Phillip Rivers was still there. I took him for $3 just because I thought, you know what? And then we got 10 bench spots like Blister said. I figured, I can use a QB, and it's almost like a streaming now with two, borderline QB1s. I would say Cap is, and Rivers is right on the cusp.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's what's going to be unique this year is we're going to see a lot of people with lowering the price so much that you can get two top quarterbacks and stream them, which never happened in the past. So it's kind of a new thing I think we're going to see a little bit, and I don't know if you're comfortable doing that. We still see guys pay the big money, though, for Peyton Manning and Rodgers, but whatever.
Well, I mean, I had $5 budgeted for a quarterback, and I was hoping to get into that range. Maybe I could get a Romo or a Brady or someone in that tier at around that $5. But to spend $9 on quarterbacks is not outrageous. And last year I had the luxury of picking up Foles off the waiver, and I bought Dalton for $1 in our big auction. But I could float the two of them back and forth, and they were viable. And so that's what I didn't really hesitate too much at $5. I thought, well, I'll throw in the $5 bid on Romo, and if I don't get it, well, then I'll let him go for $6. I mean, that's not a big deal for me. So I was pretty happy to have both. I don't know how it's going to end up playing. I've never been in a situation where I've had two decent quarterbacks sitting on my team, but Blister, like you say, a little bit of a deep bench allows you to play with that a little bit more. So,
that's right.
Yeah, well, why don't we just move into some of the things that we're seeing in auctions? I mean, that was what I wanted to do next anyways, and there's probably not a lot of people out there that have been in a whole lot of actual auctions. Like me personally, I've been in more at this point of the summer than I have been in the last few years, where I've already done 2 full-fledged auctions and then that Dynasty startup. But the opportunity to mock, right, Slim? I mean, that's something I know we wanted to bring up, that even if you haven't been in auctions and you don't have your stuff together that way, mocking is that invaluable tool that I think guys forget about a lot.
Yeah, and we kind of talked about it a little bit, but last night after the ball game, we were having a couple pops, and a couple of the guys on the team are in various auction drafts with us and stuff like that, and a couple were in the one that Blister ran on Monday, and they were just commenting on just doing these couple drafts that they've already done this year. They feel 100 times more confident now going into the ones we're going to do later on this summer. And typically these are guys, and they're buddies of ours. They listen to the pod. They still don't mock draft. They don't. And so they were saying, how much they notice the difference even just doing a couple of these drafts. And they're still not mock drafting. They're just doing these real drafts. And I said to them, this is why we tell you, go on and mock draft. I know it's a couple hours of your time, but if you can find a time on the weekend, maybe the kids are gone and you got some quiet time, go and mock draft. Every single one that you do will make you that much better. And we say it for a reason. And that's just testimonial. These guys are regular guys. They're not experts, but they're pretty experienced auction guys nonetheless, and they still don't mock very much, and they still get help. It still helps them immensely when they do get practice. So get out there and practice. If you want to be the best guy in your league, you have to mock draft.
For sure. And I think that one thing that I'm doing a lot more this year, just because we've been so busy with drafting already and it's only mid-July, is taking notes on stuff and just documenting prices and making little notes and I'm actually now keeping it all in one book so that I can go through and I can try to figure out, well, where am I at? Where was I at? What was I thinking here? What's the average what are some trends that we're seeing right now, and that's all personal stuff that you can use against what your tiering is and what your budgeting is and what your teams look like and whatever, so that when you're getting ready for your big big draft live with all of your buddies, you've got your ducks in a row, and you got a strategy, and you know what you want to do because you've practiced it, you've documented it, you've reviewed it, you've tried a couple of zig instead of zag type moves, and so I found that already helpful, even though it's only been a couple weeks of drafting here. That keeping a log and writing notes down, Blister, which is something I do so well, I thought has been helpful. That was a joke.
Yeah, it's a good idea to do that during a draft. You're then going back and do that.
What's that?
So it's a good idea doing that during the draft, so that it's easier than going back and looking through things and, how did that go again? Wait, who was in this war? How much did he go for? If you're doing a little bit of note taking during it, it is handy. Especially, probably would be handier. Like we are in a lot of similar ones. We have there's some overlap with some of the guys. It would be probably good to start to try to pattern them.
Yeah, well, and I think that's the next thing that I got to start doing, rather than taking the little bit of notes and writing down the values, but doing like we do in the hockey draft, Blister, and initials of which franchise took who and when, so that you can really,
because
see trends.
You have to be pretty dedicated to get away from your team. Like, how many teams? I think I've drafted 5 or 6 full squads already this year, 2 dynasties and whatever. And I have a lot of similarities in my teams. Lots of similarities.
I hear you.
And you know what? It's hard to get away from that. You just kind of have your mind set on somebody. Maybe it's Pierre Garçon or whatever. And
we knew that was coming.
It's hard to get away.
Antonio Brown.
Hard to get away.
Well, and it's not even necessarily a player per se. It's a price range, I find.
Yeah.
You have, I know that, somebody's going to budget $30 or something for their starting running back, their RB1. Well, there's only so many guys you can get for $30, so kind of who they're targeting, right? Especially if you've done a few drafts with them. A lot of the times we find a budget that we like and we stick to it. Doesn't matter if we find it in July or if we find it in August, but if we get a team with that budget, we're creatures of habit. We don't want to change it, and we'll think, hey, we can get another good team with this budget, we'll use it, and we'll keep using it until it doesn't work.
Well, so I just wanted to go through, I guess, some things that we've seen so far. If it's in mocks or if it's in auction drafts that you've done so far, I think it's safe to say that there's some pretty standard trends that we're seeing that we always see, but just, I guess, confirmation based on what we've seen so far. Once again, we've got the top tier of running backs, and they're going for big bucks. We were talking off the air just before we got on. You're still seeing those running backs going for $60 plus. Blister, we saw that Monday night too, that you start creeping into that $50, $55 range, and you just wonder how high it's going to go, and it tends to, for the big name guys, $60 is not far off. Blister, thanks. Tried to get you involved there, but...
Yeah, I don't know. You kind of cut out on me there, Bex.
Oh, did I? Sorry, man. No, I don't know. What I was going to say was those $60 backs.
You're talking about big name running backs, which I definitely agree. What's that?
I don't know. You must be lagging. Anyways, we'll move on.
Yeah.
Slim, what are you seeing there at the top end of the running back position? Any surprises that maybe in where the tier falls? Like right now, I'm seeing the 4 guys in that top tier.
Yeah, and we kind of touched on it, off the air. We were talking, had a pretty good conversation, actually. I mean, a month ago, if you told me Forte was going for close to 60, I wouldn't have believed it, and that's happening now. If you want them, you've probably got to expect to pay close to $60, or maybe even over in some extreme cases. But and this is something I thought we'd get away from this year, quite frankly. I really thought that after kind of what happened last year with so many big priced running backs, not doing really well, we would see a little bit of a drop in the price, and it's just not happening. And I think it's because people look at this list and they say Jamal Charles is the surest thing that's out there, LaShawn McCoy is the surest thing that's out there, Adrian Peterson, and now I guess after Forte's year last year, I think before last year he would have been what you'd call a far cry from a sure thing with his injury history, but people have confidence in him, and people have confidence in this offense, and he's up there with the big boys now. And people are, I think that there's still some owners out there that they are, I wouldn't say scared, but they just can't handle not having one of these guys on their team. They have to have a top tier running back, and they're going to spend to get them, and we're seeing it in every draft still. So yeah, it's something I didn't think we'd see, but it's still out there.
So Blister, as far as Matt Forte in standard leagues versus PPR, do you think there's a big difference on whether or not he sits up in that top tier, or is it PPR specific, and do you think he jumps up with the big boys because it's PPR?
Well, I think he definitely has a little more value in PPR, but really it's hard to, there's not much dividing him and, say, AP or LaShawn McCoy and Jamal Charles. It's PPR, but they're all going to be your top, they should be your top 4 backs off the board. And I don't think it changes too much for him either way. He should be talked about in the top 4 backs, no doubt about it. Could be the number 1 at the end of the year. You never know. But definitely PPR, he has that extra value with that offense that he's in and his ability to catch the ball out of the backfield. So, I was surprised, like we were saying about the recent drafts and stuff we've been in and the price that the guys have been going for. The fact that they are still all going so high, and it's quite, I don't know, I guess you can look at it 2 ways. I mean, if you don't spend on it, you have all kinds of money to spend on your receivers, but other guys probably look at it saying, well, you know what, there's only a few potential stud backs out there that are going to be your true number 1, very little competition behind them, they're not in a committee, they catch a lot of passes, they're worth the big bucks because that'll separate me from the field, much like a Jimmy Graham would at tight end. So there's always going to be 2 ways to look at it, and you got to go with what you feel comfortable with in the end.
Yeah, and I think that moves into the wide receiver position as well. Hey, Slim. I mean, I'm looking at the numbers even from Monday night. There's 6 guys that went for over $40, but there was 4 guys that went 45 and over, all the way up to Megatron that went for 50. What are you seeing as far as that tier breakup in the top tier of wide receivers?
Yeah, I think we see the top 6, and it's fairly consistent. They go for over $40. Julio Jones and is, I'd say, almost always the bottom of those 6, and Calvin Johnson's always at the top, and the rest kind of go somewhere in between. And yeah, Calvin typically goes for 50 or close to it, something like that, and like I said, Julio's kind of around the 40 mark, which is surprising. I thought that they would be bunched together a little bit more, but again, it's draft specific. Somebody that's higher on Des Bryant is going to make him the number 2 guy. In another draft, you'll see AJ Green be the number 2. Yeah, those guys, if you want one, you've got to budget somewhere between $40 to $50. But I don't think that's shocking. We kind of, I think, expected that this year. We've seen Calvin Johnson go at the top for around 50 for a couple of years now. So it only makes sense that guys, Demarius, Dez, AJ, they're right behind him because statistically they are right behind him.
So, Blister, just moving into that second tier then, and taking a look at what's going on at the wide receiver position, there's a big cluster of guys just after that number 6 Julio Jones as far as our rankings go, with Jordy Nelson, Antonio Brown, Alshon, Randall Cobb, V-Jax. You could even throw on Pierre Garçon, maybe even Keenan Allen into that group of that $30 to $35 range. What do you like? What don't you like? Talk to us about that second tier.
Well, I do like a couple guys that are going in that $30 range. Quite often, like you said, Garçon, Jordy Nelson, Randall Cobb, they're going to be up in that range. But what I really notice, if you're not willing to spend $40+ on any player, for example, or maybe it's just one, I threw together some numbers from the most recent draft. Now they're all going to vary a bit, but what we can agree on is that the trend is that there's still these 7, 8, 10 backs that are going for $50 plus. There's Jimmy Graham going for over 45, Peyton Manning, and then at least the top 6 receivers are pushing 45 to more or dollars or more. So if you're not willing to spend that, the bottom line is if somebody else is. This is the kind of value I've been seeing out there that you could do. So I'm just going to run down a bunch of names real quick. You might not have to, if you're listening to this on the pod, you might have to rewind it a couple times. But at receiver, this is the most recent one, and like I say, it could vary a couple bucks either way, but you're going to have this kind of value in your draft after those big bucks are spent. Edelman 17, Cordarrelle Patterson 16, Mike Wallace 11. He's usually cheaper. Roddy White 15, Emmanuel Sanders 9, Kendall Wright 8. He's a PPR monster. Wes Welker 18, Michael Floyd 18, Michael Crabtree 18, T.Y. Hilton 12, Golden Tate 13, Reggie Wayne 13, Keenan Allen 22, most expensive of that bunch, and Terrence Williams 12. Okay, so there's a nice group of receivers right there. On the flip side, we know that there's the big buck running backs. Here's some other running backs that you could look at. Bishop Sankey could be a top 10 back this year, $18. T. Rich, if he bounces back, he's only 10. Ray Rice, when he comes off, he's supposed to be looking good. If he gets suspended, comes off suspension, he's only 12. Andre Ellington, 23. Reggie Bush is 25. Toby Gerhart, expecting big things from him this year, 17. Ben Tate, 20. Stephen Ridley, he was a top 10 back 2 years ago. LeGarrette Blount's gone. Take away the touchdowns from him. If he doesn't fumble the ball, you're getting a running back here at $11. Rashad Jennings was 18. Shane Vereen, 16. Pierre Thomas is 10. Again, they've moved some bodies out of there. Pierre Thomas caught 70-some passes, I think, out of the backfield last year. Sproles is gone. He could be huge. So what would your team look like then if you hadn't spent big bucks on these guys? Say you went with Tom Brady at 7. I'll pick a few running backs. Sankey is your starter with 18. Gerhart at 17. Keenan Allen 22. Edelman 17. Emmanuel Sanders at 9. We'll throw Jimmy Graham in then. You can buy Jimmy Graham for 45. We'll throw Ben Tate in as our flex at 20. You got a dollar kicker, dollar D. You spend $159 then on your starting 10. Standard bench of eight guys, typical. Throw T. Rich on there for 10. Kendall Wright for 8. Terrence Williams for 12. Stephen Ridley for 11. So I got 4 more bench spots, and I have $9 to spend still. Now, I don't know about you guys, but there's out of all those names I just listed off, there's definitely some receivers in there that can be top 10 this year, and there's definitely some running backs that could be top 10. And I went out and definitely bought the best tight end of the whole works, and I spent 45 on him. I got a quarterback that could be top 10 easily, Tom Brady. So all of a sudden, you not only have a great starting lineup, but you have the depth too. So I don't know, that's what I've been noticing, and it's really making me think. We were talking earlier about it's so hard once you start drafting, you start liking guys, it's hard to get away from them. But putting these numbers together and looking at this closer and closer till we come up to some of our other auctions now in August, it's making me think that this would really maybe get me to change my game. Looking at this team I could have, and even a hell of a bench for that money. So some numbers.
Listen, sounds like a great article that we could have in the draft kit.
Yeah.
And in the next update.
All right.
I don't know.
Have to get working on that.
It's about the idea of different draft strategies, right? And I think you're right. There's a lot of guys that are in those 4th and 5th tiers that have huge upside, and I don't think have very low floors either, Slim. You know what I mean? Like, those guys, I think, have high ceilings, but their floors aren't that bad either, that even if you got the crappiest of their year, a lot of those guys would be serviceable at worst, right?
Oh, and that's definitely an important thing. You know, for like, I look at somebody like T. Rich. A lot of people are really down on him. I just think, you know, we saw as bad as he was last year. It can't get any worse. You know, they've addressed a few issues in the offense. The offensive line is supposed to be back. I think Dwayne Allen is going to be a huge improvement as far as run blocking. Yeah, he's not going to rip off 4.5 yards a carry. I get that. But where I'm drafting him, I don't care if he does. I mean, as long as he gets close to 1,000 yards, catches 40 balls out of the backfield, hey, he's going to be productive for $10 then at that price. And to me, that's not that hard for him to do. Even if he rushes for 800 yards or 700 yards, and still catches those 30, 40 passes, he's going to be what you paid for. He'll be that flex that you paid for. And that's his worst case scenario, in my opinion. So as unflashy as he is, he's not going to get back to where he was being drafted last year, but that's okay. For $10, he doesn't have to be that. He just has to, be a little above average. And that's not out of the question. Like, that's not that hard to do. So, yeah, and, Blister brings up great points. There's nothing wrong with, and this is why we say, if you don't get a guy, maybe you budget $40 for somebody, you don't get him, don't panic. Don't feel like you got to go and spend $50 now and get in a bidding war. Who cares? Just move on to the next thing, because there's going to be guys all over. And he's talking maybe about something, it's probably on the one extreme of a way to draft, and that's okay. Maybe you sprinkle in somewhere in between. Maybe you spend $40 on a wide receiver and get, Jordy Nelson at worst, or maybe Julio Jones or Brandon Marshall if he slips, and then you build around that after with some of these, $15 guys, and you'll still have a really good high upside receiving core. If I can get Michael Floyd for around $15 as a wide receiver too, that's awesome, because I think he can easily finish as a wide receiver 2 or better. He might get close to wide receiver 1. Who knows? But I think, again, he's a guy who has a fairly low floor and a pretty high ceiling. And those are the guys you want to target in, auction drafts. When you look at your tiers, that's who guys you should be circling or putting an asterisk beside. The guys in every tier who you think have the most upside and the least amount of downside.
Yeah, Blister, go ahead.
And and on that note, like, if you didn't want to spend $45 on Jimmy, and you still wanted one of the top 3 tight ends, you could drop down to Julius for $30 or Gronk for $25, and you could turn that extra money into having Wes Welker and Shane Vereen on your bench if you wanted to as well. I mean, your depth would be unbelievable, and like you said, you still have guys that potentially could outproduce some of those $45, $50, $60 guys. So it's definitely an option. I mean, I like what Slim's saying too. If you go and grab that one true stud receiver, I've seen that over the years. It's really good to have that one, at least one stud receiver, especially now in a PPR.
Yeah,
So,
well, I think that's
so many
that's a
options. Again,
strategy I think we all look at, right? It's one of the joys of being able to draft as an auction is taking a look at the possibility of having a top tier guy at running back and at receiver, and then being able to then work your stuff in after that. And it's about trying to find those guys with that high ceiling, a high floor, that you're going to get value in. And how are you going to find that value? Well, you got to do some research, and you got to do that stuff. What guys are going to be able to find, and what that's going to look like is doing it through mocks and taking a look at what your team would be. And even if you don't have time to sit down and do a mock, I mean, I'm sure you guys do it too. I write down a budget, and then I write down, some guys I could get at each of those price points, and then I look at what my team would look like. Well, I don't know. Maybe I need to spend $5 more on my RB2, and let's see what that team would look like.
Yep.
And it's a quick way to do a mock. You're not really mocking, but I mean, you're adding up to $200 and seeing what it looks like, because you already know more or less what the AAV is going to be, the average auction value at that particular price point, right? So. I don't know. That's something that I do. I gotta, here's 4 guys I could get for $40 as a running back. Okay, so let's say I got so and so, and then, oh geez, that team's not looking too bad. Maybe I'll run that budget tonight if I can. If not, here's what the second scenario looks like, and yeah, I could work that out. I can do 2 $20 running backs and a $40 receiver, or whatever the case may be. So practice. It's not like a snake. Like, I don't know. In that fishbowl, I just felt like I was on autopilot, for the first couple of rounds, because it was pretty easy. You just have to click on the thing. It says ADP, and you pick the next guy. Wasn't
or there's a handful of guys. Maybe there's, but yeah, I know what you mean.
For the first couple of rounds, anyways, it was pretty. Yep. It was this guy or that guy, right?
Yep, exactly. Oh, I'm picking 4th in the first 104. Okay, well, I know typically who I'm gonna have to pick between here, and I don't know. Yeah, it's definitely less thought-provoking than other ways to draft, right? And that's why we like auction.
I heard someone I don't even remember where it was. Maybe you guys were involved in this, saying that auction drafting, the TV analogy would be that it's Breaking Bad.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like that it's Breaking Bad. It's where everything else is like Full House. You know what I mean, or whatever the case may be. Like
Yeah.
there's a definite
true.
difference between the two styles, and not to say that Full House doesn't have its place. My kids love
That's
it.
right. Yeah.
But anyways, Anyways, let's take a look at drafting last year, guys. Slim, we haven't broken down your running back chart yet, where you took a look at the tiers of guys that were drafted, took a look at their total fantasy points and their auction costs, and made that scatter plot that is in the draft kit. And you just so you could see a visual of where guys were drafted, how much they produced, and trying to find some trends there. So Slim, I know you wrote a little article along with it that went into the draft kit that was in that first update in July 1st. Next one being ready for you in August 1st, 695, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, Slim, talk to us about what it was like or what type of work you put into setting up this running back stuff.
Well, this is actually kind of, when I sat down, this is the position I wanted to do. I was only going to do running backs. So this kind of started the whole thing, and then, I thought it was kind of helpful, and it showed some pretty good points. So I thought, let's do it with every position and just see what it looks like, and that kind of branched off. But I don't know. It was because this is the position that we always tend to, I think, really put under the microscope. This is where we want to hit our home runs as auction owners or fantasy football players, right? Because I think typically the big name guys cost so damn much money, right? And if you don't get one of those guys, then you want to find somebody that can produce as close to them as possible for as little amount of money. I mean, obviously that's the goal in all of auction, but I think with running back it becomes really important because we see these top guys go for so much money. I mean, it's just hard to spend, well, we'll say maybe in some cases, 33% of your budget or so, 30% on one player. So how are you going to make that up? So then when I started looking at the data, and I know this is something we talked about, I know Blister and I talked about this before last year, 16 running backs, they got over 200 fantasy points. Okay, 10 of those guys came from Tier 5 or later. So that meant that 63% of the top 16 running backs were drafted for $25 or less in an auction draft, in our auction draft last year.
Right.
Okay, which makes sense because when you think about it, there was 10 running backs whose AAV last year was $50 or over, or very close to $50. And if you can remember some of the names, it was Alfred Morris and T. Rich were usually somewhere at the bottom. C.J. Spiller too were the
Doug
bottom
Martin,
of those guys. Yeah, and then we had our Lynches and the big names. So of those guys, there were so many that didn't produce, and I thought that was astounding to me. That's over half of the running backs, by a large margin, 63%. Were drafted for under $25. So you're spending half of what you would spend on an elite guy, or even less than that, and you're getting RB1 production or RB2 production still. And I thought that was amazing. And when I saw that, it drastically changed the way I was going to approach this year, because I thought, what's the point of me spending? And I watch it now still. There are people spending ridiculous amounts of money on these top running backs. And I'm not saying they're not worth it. They are the safest options. But if I spend $25 on a running back, it's not a big deal if he gets hurt. I mean, yeah, it's it's going to hurt your team if I got Reggie Bush and he gets hurt, but it's not going to hurt my team as bad as if AP goes down, right? Because hopefully by spending $25 or around that price range on a lot of guys, I've hopefully got 4 or 5 of these guys. So if one goes down, hey, I still got 3 or 4 that I can use. Where if I got AP, and I'm kind of subscribing to the fact that I'm going to still try to get talent at other positions. I'm not just going to go and buy LaShawn McCoy and AP and have garbage everywhere else. So if I got AP, I'm not going to have the depth not even close to the depth that I would have if I'm spending less, right? Because I obviously have more money to spend on depth if I'm buying cheaper options. And to me, that makes more sense. At the running back position, you're so prone to injury that I want volume. I don't necessarily want eliteness, we'll say, because I think I can find eliteness in this volume, right? The statistics show that. I've got a 63% chance of finding that in these guys, and that's a pretty good percentage, you know. What's the percentage that LaShawn McCoy doesn't get hurt? Is it 63%? It's probably higher than that, but is it much higher? Maybe it's only 75%. So now I've only got a variance of 10, 12% going this way, and I'm saving a ton of money. So I don't know. To me, it doesn't make a lot of sense to go spend $60 on a running back this year.
Yeah, no, I think, I know it's a small sample size, but I'm sure if we went back again, you'd see similar things. Blister, do you have the chart in front of you? Any comments you want to make or anything you want to add to what Slim was talking about?
Well, yeah. This is awesome, really. This is gold here. People would be crazy not to pick this up from Slim here, or if it's in
they
the
can
kit,
only get it in the draft
sure it is,
kit, but anyways, yeah.
Well, this is money because this is huge. Like Slim says, if he spends $25 on his running back and he goes down, yeah, it's not going to hurt him as much as if he spends $60 on LaShawn McCoy this year and he goes down, because if he spends $25, he could have 2 or 3 running backs almost for what he could buy LaShawn McCoy for. So he's going to have that depth down. He's going to have the bench depth that he can be replaced. And the guy who bought LaShawn McCoy is not going to have a starter potentially sitting on his bench. He's got a backup or a long shot kind of. He's got to hope and pray that the guys on his bench become serviceable, because he's got probably 8 or 9 $1 players on his bench in the end. But when you have $25, again, and I look back at our most recent draft as well, and I look at these guys that you could potentially have on your team, especially if you still wanted to go cheap at tight end, your bench could be full of starters, and we know how hard it is and how valuable a starter at running back is at any point in the season. They often do go down, and if you have a waiver wire like we do, guys aren't going to hold back. If they got $1,000 in blind bidding free agent money, they're dropping $300, $400, $500, $600, $700 because they want that starter. That starter is going to get touches and they get points. It's going to happen. So even if you might not have AP from the Vikings, who's an MVP not that long ago, but so you passed up on $60+ for him, but you go ahead and you pick up Andre Ellington and Toby Gerhart and all these guys. You could get 3 of them for less than that $60. Well, now you got 3 starters. If they get 20 touches a week, you got guaranteed maybe 60 touches right there in your starting lineup, versus AP might get 25 or 30, and he might do quite a bit with them, no doubt about it. Nothing wrong with that, but. You definitely, if AP or your RB2 goes down, maybe your RB2 was, I don't know, Pierre Thomas, who's not a bad, he's a good PPR receiver as running back. But once you lose one of them, especially if it was AP, bang, your depth and your chances of winning. Like last year, I had CJ Spiller, it was a bum, and Julio Jones went down. I had spent big bucks on the 2 of them, and that pretty much toasted me. I did okay with Josh Gordon, obviously, but those are the things with. It really makes you think. The more we talk about it, it might not be so hard to change my strategy next draft after all.
Well, not
that I've ever spent. I haven't spent 60 on anybody.
Yeah. Well, that's why I went on Monday night. I was just going to say, I like the idea of trying to find that one guy in, maybe tier 2 that's going to be able to hit, and then a bunch of guys that are going to be able to hopefully fill in and be starters and be RB1s or RB2s, but 4 guys that could be RB2s, right? So, I went DeMarco Murray. I probably spent a little more than I should have, but I was circumstance.
Didn't matter at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. But, Joik Bell, Danny Woodhead, it's PPR. Looking at Rashad Jennings, and then I took both backs from Atlanta because, hopefully at Steven Jackson for 3 or 4 weeks, and then Freeman comes in and cleans it up. But hopefully there's 3 guys there that are going to be RB2s every single week. And if DeMarco does pan out, or if he only stays as an RB, low-end RB1 or high-end RB2, I think I'm doing pretty good if I have 3 RB2s on my team. in a PPR. So, and I have depth on my bench where it's Joik Bell this week, it's Danny Woodhead next week, it's away you go. So Rashad Jennings or whatever.
If you got 3 or 4 RB2s in your team, you got to remember, week in and week out, any of those guys is capable of being an RB1. Are their chances as great as Forte and McCoy and Charles? No, they're not. But they score 2 touchdowns in in week 3. Hey, they're all of a sudden easily an RB1, most likely for that week. And that's all you care about is week in and week out. And like Blister said, if somebody's getting close to 300 touches, I mean, they're going to have games where they really produce. And the beauty is you can stream them almost, right? You're playing the matchups. Hey, Chris Ivory has a terrible match or awesome matchup this week. Maybe he's your 6th running back you have, right? Oh, well, I'm going to play him as my flex this week to go along with Gio Bernard and Le'Veon Bell or something or whatever. I don't know. But you just have so many more options when you go with this strategy versus, if I buy AP, I know mostly, well, he's staying in, but I know the other running backs I have are going to have to stay in, and because I'm probably only going to have 3 or 4 because that's all I'm going to be able to afford to buy, so I'm not going to be able to tinker around too much. What's I'm starting is what's going to be in there, and there are probably going to be some low-end options that I have on my team. So yeah, I don't know. It just seems I personally like the to be able to have options where I can play matchup specific fantasy football.
No, what's interesting about Slim's team, like Beck's already mentioned his running backs, but what I liked about Slim's team is he's got Ellington, Reggie Bush, and Toby Gerhardt. There's his top 2 running backs in his flex if he wants it to be, if he goes that route. But then his bench has got Fred Jackson, who's, he's old, but it's a redraft, and he's been producing every year. He's, that's great. He was better for me last year than CJ was. D'Angelo Williams, he's got another number 1 there. No Sean Marino, we don't expect him to put up the points he did last year, but if he does get healthy and he does take over the number 1, he's got another number 1 already. Yeah. And Darren McFadden is starting off as a number 1 who potentially, if he stays healthy, could be as good as anybody still. He's not old and washed up. Wow. He just has a hard time staying healthy. But you got these guys that are there. So there's some risk and stuff with them, but they're already, like D'Angelo, potentially No Sean, and Darren are 3 more number 1 backs for a team that have solid talent. I mean, they're guys that you can use. You might be able to use them some weeks ahead of some of even your starters. So that to me is a little more reassuring than not having that. Compared to what I didn't like about mine, I'm starting Le'Veon and Monty Ball. Le'Veon Bell, Monty Ball. I like
every
that.
week. Yeah, good.
And those are good options. Yeah.
And I got Bernard Pierce if I want a running back at a flex for a few weeks at least until Ray Rice comes back. Hopefully he'll do something in that time if his shoulder heals up. But then after that, I got Jeremy Hill, David Wilson, Kyrie Robinson, Terrence West. There's really no guarantee that any of them at this point are going to be seeing significant time. I'm hoping Hill and I'm hoping West do. But Kyrie Robinson, who knows? There's never been, Pierre Thomas put up some solid numbers in PPR last year, but there's really no, when you think of the New Orleans backfield, there's no, over the last how many years, we haven't really seen somebody come in and just be the man. Mark Ingram hasn't been. Darren Sproles had a good year. He's gone downhill the last couple, but it's just because there's too many cooks in the kitchen there. And then David Wilson, well, he might not even play. So it's a little scarier, at this point. But it's only July. Maybe come September maybe it'll look wonderful by then. Who knows?
That's right.
Maybe I'll have a couple other guys that are going to see significant time. It's hard to say.
Blister, during the pre-production meeting tonight, we talked to, but you mentioned that the 3 of us have the most expensive benches, and I think that this strategy tells you why, right?
Well, and I was just going to get to it too. I'll kind of explain how it went.
You can $1 a receiver every week on on the waiver wire and shoot for the stars at wide receiver 3, but you're not going to get you're just not going to get it on the waiver as far as running backs go. So I'd rather have nice depth at running back and spend a few extra dollars on my bench at running back so that I can, injury somebody or match up somebody. Go ahead, Slim.
Well, yeah, I know. And when sitting down to do this draft, um, I just kind of threw a budget together. It was pretty rough. I mean, but we've done enough drafts where you kind of have an idea of what you want to do in a typical draft. And this one, I thought, okay, I want to spend $40 on my first running back. That was my goal. And what happened was you couldn't get one for $40. Nobody was going for around 40. And so I found myself, there was a couple running backs left. Guys like Reggie Bush, Ellington, Rashad Jennings was out there. I think Gio Bernard was still out there. Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
So there was guys like that, and I was looking, okay, I don't mind any of these guys in a PPR, so I'm going to go and spend to get them. And it comes to a point, and we talked about this kind of off the air, and I was talking about this yesterday with guys. One of my things or strategies that I personally use is, all right, I know I missed out on all the $40, the guys that I wanted to get a $40, but I've still got $40 sitting here at this position. Now, for example, Andre Ellington came on the board. I got him for 23. It's more than maybe I would spend in another draft, but you're looking at the board. I would have gone to 40 for him if I had to, quite frankly. And well, maybe not, but I was in my mind, I'm thinking, this is what I got to do. When Gio Bernard was nominated, I said, I'm going to go to 40. I don't care. I know he's probably not worth that, but at this stage in the draft, I have the money, so I might as well try and get guys that are still, in my opinion, RB2s. And what happened was then you start getting these cheaper options, and now, I've saved $20. I had 40, I spent 20. Where am I going to put it? And this is where you said, Bex, let's start throwing it on the bench.
Yeah.
And I said, all right, I'll take a guy, and I'll give you credit. I got stuck with Michael Floyd. I didn't want him. He ended up as my fourth wide receiver. Not a bad thing. I paid more than I probably should have, so that ate a little money. But then it was kind of sprinkling. Well, I can go, instead of going on $1 here, I can go to $5. So, and that's like Blister said, I was looking at who was out there, and I thought, you know what? I'm just going to go and take guys that I think are going to get lots of touches this year. And maybe they don't do anything with them, but I'm not spending big money. I would rather take Fred Jackson than, I don't know, I'm trying to think of somebody young here that, say, Christine Michael. Because like you said, Michael needs something to happen to him to get touches, right? Fred Jackson's going to get touches. I mean, obviously if Spiller gets hurt, he's going to get more, but we know Fred Jackson's still going to get touches. Buffalo's going to run the ball a ton. And Spiller's not the kind of back that's going to be a workhorse. They're going to mix them in there probably fairly evenly. So those are the guys that I tried to target, and they were going for cheap, and they typically do. So like you said, I would rather spend $3 on a guy that I know is going to get touches right out of the gate than $1 on a guy that I might have to wait until halfway through the season to maybe get touches. And I still don't even know if he's going to get many. So, and that's something that I haven't done. Like, I will admit, in previous years, I was of the strategy, I'm going to spend 80% of my budget on my starters, and I'm going to have the thinnest bench or the cheapest bench ever, because I figured I can play the waiver wire pretty well and still pick guys up, but it's a grind. And you're not, like you said, Bex, you're not getting the talent by getting $1 guys. It's hard to do, where you can get much better talent or more consistent talent for $4 or $5 at a position on your bench than for $1.
And and ultimately, I guess the nicest way to do it would be to have a little mixture of the both, right? Like, got a couple guys that if they hit, they could be huge, and you got a couple guys that are going to get the ball. They're aging or injury prone or whatever, but you know that basically you want those older, maybe injury prone guys to help you get the season started, because they're there for you if you need them. And then you're hoping that maybe by week 4, week 5, or week 6, maybe that's when your Jeremy Hills or your Terrence West or some of these other guys that are rookies or just young or in an RB2 situation on their team have found an opportunity to win a starting job or something. And then maybe, then you're really in good shape. But yeah, crystal ball, we'd all have a perfect team.
That's right.
Sure. But I mean, it's interesting talk, right? Like, I mean, already tonight we've talked about 3 different drafting strategies, and if it all worked out, like crystal ball, like you said, if it all worked out, like, you don't mind what your team looks like. Blister going with Jimmy Graham and what could be scrubs for the rest, right? Versus, spending all your money on your starters and then working a cheap bench, or maybe targeting one bigger name guy at each position and then finding those gems or the potential for those gems. And I think that that's what your chart, Slim, really showed to me anyways, is that those guys in tier 4, 5, 6 at every position, that there's a good chunk of those guys that score well. There's some that don't, but there's a good chunk of them that do. And so I could take 1 out of 6 guys from the top tier that scores well, hopefully, or maybe one of the 5 that doesn't. Or I could take 5 guys out of the 10 and hope that 3 of them hit.
And this is where I think when you do your homework, it's like playing blackjack, right? If you know how to play the game and you really know how to play, you're creating an edge where there isn't an edge for 99% of the other people that play. And fantasy football to me is similar in the sense that if I look at any tier and I've done my homework, and that doesn't mean just reading people's rankings, like actually trying to study and figure out who is going to emerge, you're creating an edge for yourself because you can say, of the 6 guys in this tier, for example, I know these 3, I don't even want them. Right. So now you've just taken 50% of the choice away. So now you have a 1 in 3 chance of these guys. Based on your homework, you say that I think these 3 guys are going to break out and produce at a higher level. So if you can get 2 of those guys, you're just creating more a better percent chance of you hitting on these guys. Whereas a guy that just walks into a draft, hasn't done anything, he's just drafting on name alone, right? He's gonna pick whoever because last year he did a good year. If you're looking at last year's points, that's a big mistake because it's not last year anymore. You should be reading what's going to happen this year. Let those guys, and that's what'll happen. You'll see these guys drafting on name from last year. Well, so much can change in a year, especially at the running back position. We see it all the time. That who cares what they did last year? Okay, you can use it as a measuring stick or a place to maybe place a guy, but initially. But after that, you've got to start jockeying around based on offensive coordinators, depth charts, the offensive lines of teams, different offensive schemes they're going to. There's all these factors that you have to play in that are going to change how you rank guys, and that's what's going to win you a league, and that's what's going to separate you from just the average Joe that you're playing with. You're creating this edge for yourself.
It's perfect. Blister, anything you want to add to that? We're just past the hour mark. I'm loving where we are.
No, I think that's excellent. I mean, you can't do yourself more favors than by going into a few mocks or even some of these other cheap drafts or whatever, just to get a feel before you go into your bigger ones. And there's a lot of strategies out there. You gotta go play with them and then see what you're happy with. And then, like we've always said many times and wrote about, you have to be willing to have 2 or 3 different game plans when you go in, because you might have your heart set on a certain strategy. Maybe it's the one I just mapped out. You're going to spend no big bucks on any of your players except for perhaps Jimmy Graham or something, and you go in there and for some reason this doesn't work out. You got to be ready to maybe the guys are going more expensive than you thought, maybe whatever, so just do your homework. Do your homework.
Yeah, that's right. Practice. Do your homework and look at stuff moving forward rather than stuff that's been in the past. If you want to see stuff that is moving forward, check out our draft kit. See the segue there, guys? $6.95 gets you the multimedia draft kit. It's the only all-auction draft kit on the internet right now. It's multimedia. These videos are being embedded. Links to the podcast. We have downloadable tiers and spreadsheets so that you can customize your own. We say this all the time. Don't take Blister's rankings. Don't take Slim's rankings. Make your own. But we've done all the hard work for you where we've put them into a spreadsheet. You can just mix and match and do whatever you need to do. It's $6.95. Free updates all summer long. We put out one update already. We'll put one out for August 1st, and then we'll nickel and dime a few as we get into the heat of draft season. So make sure you're checking that out. Head on over to the website, thefantasyfootballauction.com/draft kit. There's this little bit of a sneak peek on there. If you're not quite sure if the draft kit's for you, if you want to spend less than a magazine on 110 pages of auction content, you can check out some of the content for free. If and if you're one of those guys, and Slim, we were talking about it yesterday, if you're one of those guys that says, why would I pay $7? I can go out to get all these free draft kits. You can go to CBS and download their draft kit. It's free. You can go to ESPN and download their draft kit. It's free. USA Today has one. All the free content on FF Toolbox. You're right. You're absolutely right. There's a ton of free content out there. But just so you know, I scoured through the CBS draft kit, the ESPN draft kit, the USA Today draft kit. I went through Fantasy Pros, and I went through FF Toolbox. While they all have great information on player rankings, they all have great information on auction values. Well, I won't say great information, but they list auction values. What they don't have is they don't have auction-specific material. From those 5 websites, I found one 2014 written article on auctions. It was probably about 700 words, and it was, this is what fantasy auction is. Nothing to do with strategy, nomination strategies, tierings, budgeting, any of that type of stuff. We talked more tonight in the hour than those hundreds of free pages that you can find out on the internet. So before you think you can do it all for free, and you probably can, we do a lot of the hard work for you. $6.95, free updates, multimedia videos, everything's all in there. We've done all the heavy lifting. The other thing you could do for us, if you're not interested in supporting us with the draft kit, head on into iTunes, give us a rating, give us a comment on there, good or bad. We do better if there's better rankings. I'm not going to lie to you. So the more people who are commenting and the more stars we get, the better we do. So if you like what you heard, get on iTunes and do that, or on Stitcher and do that. Write us some comments, write us some reviews. Give us a rating. It's free for you to do, and it helps to spread the word of auction, because if auction is Breaking Bad and Snake is Full House, maybe more people need to be hearing about auction. So anything else you guys want to add? I haven't asked you guys that question at the end of a podcast for a while.
Liar.
No, I just wasn't on the site.
Oh, yeah, you
I was just on the site. I almost bought the kit.
Just bought the kit after that?
What a sales pitch. He bought the guy that...
looks so good, yeah. And
wrote it,
I went right to the site, pulled it up, and wow, it looks good. So that was close.
So follow us on Twitter at Fantasy Auction. Give us a like on Facebook /Fantasy Football Auctioneer. Comment on iTunes or on Stitcher, and check out the draft kit. Check out the freebie that's on there. Slim just wrote an article as well that's also available only to it's available right on the website if you enter in your email address. It's 5 ways to win and 3 ways to lose your auction. So you can check that out as well. Blister's got a new newsletter article that he's put out. I'm going to send that out tonight to the people who have subscribed to the newsletter. So we got lots of stuff. And guys, I'm thinking the next couple weeks as we head into August here, we talk about things that we've been doing, but more specifically nomination strategies, budgeting strategies. Maybe we can throw a live mock in there, and then positional stuff as we fly right into the end of August.
Love it.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We should get a live mock going on here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was forgetting about that.
Next week, just so everyone knows too, it's going to be a later pod. We might not get on until probably Friday night, maybe Thursday night. Hey, Blister, because we've got the big golf trip this week.
That's right.
Or next week.
We're heading down to Detroit Lakes, Minnesota. Looking forward to that.
Detroit Lakes, Minnesota. So if any of you from the cities that are heading up that way doing some golfing, I'll be in the bush trying to find my ball, and Blister will be way down the fairway.
Anyways. I hope I'm on the fairway.
Slim, I'm sure I'll see you on Twitter tomorrow as you are working tomorrow. Blister, I will see you on the golf course tomorrow.
That's
and
right.
for the rest of you, I'll see you when it's springtime in the Rockies.